To you guys. I'd like to hear some more stories sometime. Jeff Boyle and Bill Bennett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
We're heading now to the forum for our final keynote, New, Now, Next.
Well, 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 it's that time already. We're nearly at the end, but my goodness, haven't you all been fantastic flying with us today? Thank you so much, and welcome everybody back, and welcome to our final keynote panel, New, Now, Next, the definitive roadmap, which I think is going to be an absolute blast. We're going to be joined by some of the industry's leading practitioners to hear what caught their attention at IBC 2018. They've done all the legwork, so you can just sit there and relax. Kind of nice, isn't it? And there's also going to be a look forward to what lies ahead in 2019, and the chance for you to vote in a poll via Slido is coming up very shortly, so get your app or browser ready if you want your vote to be counted. And it's kind of nice watching the little poll kind of move up and down like that. So, my goodness, this is it for me. It's where I hand over for the final time to our chair for the session. Thank you all so much for having me, and I'm honoured to leave you in the incredibly capable, safe hands of none other than IBC's consulting editor and media commentator. A last panel of the day, giant round of applause, a few cheers and whistles if you like. Ladies and gentlemen, Kate Bulkley.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and welcome to the final session of IBC 2018. And I am indeed Kate Bulkley, and we do have a stellar panel. This is really a wrap-up panel with a view at what's new, what's now, new, and next. Okay, so now, new, and next, which I think is a great thing, except I couldn't say it. Definitive roadmap, we're saying. You know, definitive is difficult, but it's definitely going to be a roadmap. We've got 2 CTOs, and we've got 2 people that are working in very cool startups in this area that are putting their lens across the media industry. So I think it will be an interesting session because they're coming from very different viewpoints. There is this poll that we want you to do. So you know how to do this now, slido.com, or go into the interactive session of the Slido thing. You will see the polls up there. Go to polls, not questions, go to polls. And if you'd like to vote, that would be fantastic. And at some point, I'm sure it will come up on the screen. Basically, what we're doing here is the questions that we're asking you is if you had $5 million extra that you found maybe in the back of the sofa, what would you put it towards? What would be the thing that you would want to look at? And the list is things like AI, machine learning, blockchain, cloud, cybersecurity, data analytics. So give us your vote. So while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce who we have here. Next to me, we have David Kline. He's the CTO of Viacom, a very small company you might have heard of, MTV, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, etc. Thank you for coming, David. Next to him, we have Michelle Munson. Michelle Munson is co-founder and CEO of Eluvio. Eluvio is one of those startups that I mentioned, Content Fabric. She's going to tell us more about that. Next to Michelle, we have Enrique Rodriguez. He is the newly minted EVP and CTO of Liberty Global. Newly minted in the sense that he came from TiVo very recently. Was it, how long has it been?
2 months ago.
2 months ago, okay, 2 months ago. So, you know, fairly recent move to Liberty Global, very interesting. So Enrique, thank you for coming. And last but not least, we have Seth Shapiro. He is the founder of Alpha Networks, again, another one of our startups. Blockchain-powered OTT platforms, and I'm sure he'll tell us more about that. So, the poll has happened. Oh my goodness, it's happening real time. What's happened? This gives us a view on where you all are thinking. So look at this. AI machine learning is the top. Data analytics is next. Cloud is next. Cloud has just gotten some more. Sorry, data analytics has just gotten some more. Cybersecurity, and at the bottom, blockchain. Ooh, Seth and Michelle, you're going to have to really talk it up. Okay. All right. So here we go. Let's start with David. I'm going to start with you. 183 countries, 43 languages, 10 platforms. You tell me 90 apps, 1,000 websites. I mean, Viacom has got a lot of stuff going on.
Yes,
as a CTO of this company, and we heard actually from Kelly Day earlier, who's running your Viacom Digital Studios, and she, of course, is pushing content to Snap and Facebook and third-party sites and apps. So what is your focus? What are your pain points? What are you thinking about? as a CTO of Viacom?
It's a fantastic question. So at Viacom, we're very focused on a strategy. It's been laid out for the last 2 years. Our CEO is not shy about expressing it when he speaks. We're focusing on our short-form content. Kelly Day, who was a phenomenal hire, who runs our Viacom Digital Studios, and really figuring out how we take short-form, both native digital and from the show. She talked about Cribs. She talked about SpongeBob, Bikini Bottom. Being able to really get our content out there on all these different platforms. We're focusing on creating content. Our studios, our Elephant House studio in the UK, Telefe down in Argentina, and Hollywood, which includes Paramount, as well as our Hollywood facilities in Burbank for Nickelodeon MTV.
Yeah. So lots of content.
Content.
So what do you worry about as a CTO?
So I worry about how that content gets consumed, how the consumer feels about that content, but not just the end consumer on the B2C side, but the B2E, the enterprise side. So whether it's production, whether it's marketing, whether it's advertising, how do they do their jobs, and how do I make sure that that technology stack works for them so that it really shines for our consumer? So if it's Kelly and she wants to syndicate content, how do I make sure that I can package and deliver that content effectively? So for me, cloud computing, it's huge, and it's exciting, by the way. It's a different aspect from what we used to do. Looking at things associated to data analytics, which came up very high, which does tuck back to blockchain, we'll hear later, and what you do around taxonomies, that two-way street, advanced advertising. We have a group called Vantage that does advanced advertising around optimizing our advertising to our content.
Yeah, Vantage is interesting because you're doing something with Fox on that right now.
We are actually licensing it to Fox, which is our first license deal, and it's a product that we started in 2015, and it's been wildly successful. And it really enables the advertiser to get more bang for their buck, and it's very focused.
So one of the things I would think for you as the CTO of Viacom, with all this content and new content being created all the time, is how do you actually tag it? Isn't that?
That is huge.
That's a huge
It's also
problem.
a great question, by the way. So tagging is important because, to me, understanding, and to the company in general, understanding what is in that content enables everything to happen. So if I can tell you where a sunrise or a sunset is, we had a conversation on the phone about Jersey Shore, Geordie Shore, Warsaw Shore, Acapulco Shore. We're on a lot of shores. Even when there's not a shore, we're on a shore. But with that, I need to be able to help our consumer find out what's in that content. And then I can add advertising and marketing and all this wonderful opportunity that enables to make that content shine, but make it more consumable.
But as a CTO, wouldn't you have a problem? Because what Kelly was doing at Awesomeness, that was all digital native stuff. So it was created in this new world when you would just have metadata tagged it.
Correct.
But I mean, some of this stuff you've got in your library.
40 years plus. So even Paramount, 100 years plus. It's very old. But what's nice about that is we work on the active library first, and then we go back and work on the storage in the back. So,
so your big thing is you're thinking about tagging, how to get this content, how to make it good for the consumer, and how to make your internal teams be able to find it,
exploit it, put sentiment around it, and really make it a world-class experience like it is.
Okay. Enrique, let's come to you next. Very different approach because you're basically a platform company, right? I mean, when I think about Liberty Global, you're the biggest broadband cable provider outside of the US, right? I think you're in 29, you have 29 million customers, I think.
That's about right. Yeah.
I mean, it's more RGUs, but that's 29 million customers. And I think you're in 30 countries. That sounds about right? Yeah. So, I mean, this is a different kind of, what do you think about? What do you think about as a CTO for that kind of a platform company in this world?
It's actually a complementary view to what David was talking about, because as the consumer is more and more excited about getting to that content, that fantastic content that Viacom and other companies are creating, that consumer ultimately has to get to that content through a network. Okay, it's so easy to talk about over the top. I guess we're the bottom of the top. When somebody goes over the top,
you're the base of the top.
I guess we're kind of the bottom of that. But I say it jokingly, but at the end of the day, the experience the consumer gets relies heavily on the quality of the networks that companies like Liberty Global and others build. Because at the end of the day, no matter what service the consumer will want to get, hopefully they'll want to watch some of our content. You got to remember, some countries like Ireland, we also own the television stations, some television stations. In other countries, we own only the aggregation service and the broadband underneath it. And yet in other countries, we also own or have a participation on the mobile network.
The mobile, yeah.
Okay? So what's very important for us as a company is to ensure that the technologies that we're selecting and how we interact with partners, especially on the content side, are really going to bring the consumer that fantastic experience they're going to get. Okay? I'm obviously old enough to remember the days where we distributors, thought of other aggregators as pure competitors, right? 5 years ago, you couldn't speak to a cable person about Netflix without, getting irritated, right? Yeah. Today,
irritated would be a mild.
I'm a mild person. Getting irritated, right? But today, in fact, we are very careful to try to bring to the consumer a fantastic experience, no matter what service they want to consume at that
Well, what's
point.
interesting about that, what you say about Netflix, is they've changed their tune too. They're being more flexible now in wanting to be bundled into some of these services because they're looking at the next customers. Where can they reach the next customers? I mean, they were here in force at IBC talking about broadcast partnerships,
Yep.
right? So you've put it in. I know Virgin Media has it in the UK.
Yep.
Netflix is inside the house, so to speak.
Yes.
So it's a different kind, but I take your point. So what keeps you up at night as a CTO? What is it obviously the experience is important, getting that content to the people on the right device, I guess, or on the device they want. Is that?
The number one thing that keeps us up, I should say two things. Okay, first of all, the quality of the networks.
Okay.
I can't emphasize that enough.
And make sure they're up to speed. They're whatever made for purpose. You upgrade them. You have to keep putting money into them.
I have a fantastic daughter, and I always joke that when she was 15, 16, 17, the only way to guarantee she was going to call me is if Wi-Fi was not working. I mean, seriously, because that's what determined the quality of her time at home.
Right.
And it's just so easy to forget. Especially on a show like this, where we're seeing fantastic technologies that you folks are working on day in, day out. But at the end of the day, those technologies can't get to the consumer if you don't have fantastic networks running on. So that's probably what worries me, number one.
Yeah.
A little bit longer term is how are we going to deal with this continued increase in ways, places, times that the consumer wants to get to that content. Okay, new set of iPhones get announced last week. Guess what? When that person opens their new iPhone XS Max,
yeah, and there's an R one as well.
You know what?
Yeah.
They want to make sure that Ziggo app here in the Netherlands works fantastically,
Yeah.
and that doesn't happen if we didn't do a whole lot of testing and a whole lot of experience quality behind that. So those two things are really what keeps us up awake at night the most. But I will say, and I'm sure that we're going to get to some of those points, thinking about how we're going to sustain our revenue streams in the midterm, getting more advanced advertising on the platform, having more ways for the consumer to value the place that we have in that value chain is really, really going to be the most important strategic
sort of
question.
new revenue streams. Yeah, good point. Okay.
And cybersecurity that comes along with all of those.
All of that, yeah, right.
Of course, you have to do all that while still staying protected.
By protecting, while you're protected. Do all this new stuff, we have to protect it. Okay,
Yes,
right.
exactly.
Michelle, give us your view. I mean, what are the things that you see this industry needing to think about the most, or maybe one thing that's the most important?
Sure. So I'm involved in something that's, I guess, a bit blue sky, but dovetails straight from Enrique's comments about the internet over which the content is now mainstream and explosive, if you will. I think it's about 80% of traffic over the internet in 2020 or 21 is projected to be video.
Yeah.
And what that means is that it's no longer a network of data, it is a network of content. And with those thoughts in mind, if you think back to the internet origins, at the time it was started, it was an open network that allowed for packet routing between hosts. But the ensuing 20 years of application architectures, particularly for delivering video content, started to take up what you would think of as a pretty entrenched and sort of legacy and not open model, which is client-server, now with a lot of data trapped in clouds and databases. Right. And following on from that, now 20-year-old caching architecture that is the basis for all of this explosive OTT and related delivery of video to consumers. And all of this said, at the point that the demand reaches a certain level, both the sustainability of this in terms of what internet core bandwidth is available, and also the practical scalability of this for the industry, right? What kind of returns we can get on the audience, this growing audience is fundamentally limiting. So, long-winded way of saying that, I feel, and the folks that part of what we're working on at Eluvio feel that it is really time to think about a different architecture. And this also goes along with a paradigm shift in computer science, which is made possible by advances in certain technologies, which are on this buzzword list, if you will, of machine learning and distributed ledgers or blockchains as they're known.
So what's interesting for me is like you're sort of best known as the founder of Aspera, right?
Of course.
And now you're sort of operating this blockchain space. You just said it's a buzzword, but it's more than that. It's really about thinking differently about how we deal with content.
Content, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, and I think...
And this is to do what, quickly? Is it to make it safer? Is it to make it more economical? Is it to make it, what are the...
I think it's to be able to truly capture and appreciate its value.
Yeah.
And that has been limited, arguably, by the architectures directly and indirectly, and we'll talk about some of the missing flexibility as we go.
Yeah, cool. So Seth, you've heard this, a lot of people. You're running Alpha Networks, and Alpha Networks is basically this over-the-top platform using some blockchain. Guilty. And you've worked a lot with IBM Watson, I think. So talk a little bit about your view. What is the big threat or opportunity for the media industry?
I mean, I've been in Hollywood working in digital for about 24 years, and I've worked with most of the networks. And the thing that hit me, to Michelle's point about 80% of the internet moving towards video, that video hopefully is going to be monetized to the benefit of the people who created it and distributed it in some form. And as content has increasingly decentralized really across devices and form factors and delivery mechanisms, it becomes harder, obviously, to track all of that. And so, the past can always be either this primitive, horrible time or the good old days, depending on how you look at it. And, for advertisers, CBS, NBC, ABC was a pretty good time because you could know more or less who was watching what. So it was good for networks, and it was good for advertisers. Wasn't necessarily great for consumers who had limited choice. Wasn't great for producers and creators who had very few buyers. Now we've got all these buyers, which is amazing. We've got all these form factors, which is great, but it's increasingly hard to know who's watching what. And so when I got more involved in the distributed ledger blockchain space, one of the things that really became interesting to me, I've done a lot of OTT launches, was to create a data and analytics platform. So essentially, the one way to describe blockchain is a trustless ledger. So if you use Quicken or QuickBooks or some form of accounting software, you have your version of the truth, and the bank has their version of the truth, and then when you reconcile, you're matching them up to make sure that they work. If you think about the idea of having a trustless ledger in the cloud that is arbitrated by basically the cloud, by the crowd, and that is essentially uncorruptible and transparent. What are the ramifications of that for content creators? We were talking about the agreement, right? Many of us have had experiences where a specific buyer, a large buyer of content, commissions something, and then the commission person, the producer of the studio, comes back and says, "Hey, how did my show do?" And the answer is, "Yeah, we can't tell you that. We're not gonna tell you that."
Definitely can't get that out of Netflix. So your main point is that this kind of technology is allowing people to understand better where their content's going, who's watching it, and then hopefully be able to monetize it more easily and more transparently using the ledger. Yeah?
Yeah, two things.
Okay.
One would be that large bucket of understanding exactly who watched it and why, and then the other thing is the ability to to be able to infer from that using cognitive models and all the rest of the buzzwords.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many buzzwords
that you can actually start to draw new models about who's going to watch what. The very quick example is I've got people who work for me in Korea who, in a traditional demographic targeting map, we have nothing in common, but we watch the same stuff. Yeah. So that would be actually potentially valuable to Viacom to know, wow, target this show doesn't just get targeted to Seth in LA, but it should get targeted to
somebody in Korea. Okay.
Korea as well.
So let's go on to our next one. Sort of B2B, D2C, including cloud. Cloud was obviously a big hit from the audience, right? So if we look at how the business model, how these are changing, I mean, it seems to me all I'm hearing about now is D2C and consumer. We've obviously had to put the consumer much more in the center of the whole conversation. Yeah. So David, if I can just start with you again. Different capabilities of the cloud. What are you thinking about? How does this help you with these new business models or these new audience?
Sure. The cloud is exciting and terrifying, both at the same time. Depending on how you look at it from a financial place, it's a lot more OpEx than CapEx. From an opportunity perspective, enable things to be burstable. So when I'm doing social media activities, I don't have to worry about, do I have the proper hardware behind it? I can expand upon it and then decrease when I need to. But the consumer's getting more savvy. They're getting more connected. If anybody walked around the floor, 5G, blockchain, all these buzzwords come together, but earlier when you talked about the pipes, if those pipes are no good, all these great data machiations and the rest just don't work, including the cloud and how the cloud interconnects. So for Viacom, the way I'm looking at it and the way my team is looking at it is we're trying to figure out, starting with content, since we're a content company, how does that help us in an ROI perspective to make, again, internals' lives much easier when I'm doing a production. I can do remote editing. I can do remote productions more feasibly in the cloud than having to go back to an edit house. As compared to content in the cloud where I can easily tag machine learning or AI opportunities that I can do an AR version of, again, Trevor Noah on The Daily Show having a conversation with me and then him asking me, do you have a Heineken? Just making that up.
Yeah. I was going to say, that would be good.
Well, it would be interesting. But the point is, it's enabling that content to do more. And the cloud is part of that ecosystem, and it's a necessary evil. But there are also
necessary
evil.
When
I say evil, a lot of technologists look at it and say, if I don't own it in my own data center, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or broadcast centers for that matter.
We're still in that era. Because I thought we'd kind of gotten beyond that now.
I would say
for some types of data. Sorry to interrupt you. For some types of data, that remains very important, right? Ultimately, as a content provider, I'm sure you will want to make sure that any consumer that touches your content is something that we can account, to, and if it's free content or paid content. So the security remains very, very important. But more and more, I look at the cloud as liberating from a
very much so.
As a what?
Very much liberating.
Oh, liberating.
Yeah,
very much.
So you think it's evil, and you think
no. Time out. Didn't say evil. So what I mean by evil is it becomes, if you're in the business for too long, meaning that data center, or even broadcast, we want to put broadcast in the cloud. That's my goal with Viacom by 2020. Broadcast is fully enabled, whether it's a live event or it's not. But I talk to other of my peers, some of them don't want to do that because it's different, it's change. The cloud is a necessary thing. However, that doesn't mean put everything in the cloud because not everything works. Going back to either whether it's cybersecurity or something that wasn't native for the cloud, putting a square peg in a round hole doesn't make it any better. It's the same problem.
Yes,
for the sake of fun in this interesting debate, could I interject yet another position on all this, which is that absolutely the utility of cloud computing has transformed, is transforming enterprise IT and the media business. That said, if you look at where the economics land, the scalability of how all benefit is only as good as the scale of the individual systems that constitute the clouds themselves, and also those are, by definition, controlled by a single company. And take a big step back from that. You think forward out.
Who might that be? Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud? Yes.
And I think that this is all said from the viewpoint of so much more demand for fantastic content by the consumer and all this great content being created to reach that. If we're really after direct consumer, must we be held hostage by the current economic model defined by that? And then I'll just throw one more perspective, which is there are a lot of proven businesses, such as, if I might say, Uber, Lyft, the United States, Airbnb, that have taken what might be considered a more radical, decentralized view of traditional systems and created very effective platforms that make it possible to achieve much greater efficiencies than existed in a or a centralized kind of model of a utility service. So I would just say maybe looking forward that the economics call us to think post-cloud as well.
Just to pile on, I think part of the opportunity and the responsibility of startups is to, the next wave of technology is to solve exactly the problem that he described, which I think is right. It's quite right. We have to, it's going to be the next wave that's going to help move more stuff from OpEx to CapEx, because you think, if you think about the number of years that we all talked about, those of us who believed in it, how much the cloud would be transformative, it takes a while for business models to catch up. It always does. And so these guys have to bear the extra expense of those systems while the market becomes more efficient, while we can find more ways to monetize that content and to reduce the red ink around that. And I do think that that list of buzzwords in there are a lot of the solutions that are going to move it from deficit to surplus.
But it's an evolution, not a revolution. And that's what you have to be prepared for.
I mean, Enrique, when you hear this, you know, we've talked about CapEx, OpEx. Obviously, everyone wants to do OpEx, not CapEx. Do you, when you look at the cloud and what you're thinking about, and what, you know, I mean, David's put his flag out there. He said, you know, in the cloud 2020, right? What do you think? I mean, is this something where you're moving?
By the way, we are very heavily in the cloud now, just to be clear.
Sorry.
You're already
very much, it's become native fabric.
Very special anniversary. So first of all, tell me about your stand, Stephen.
So the stand is here celebrating everything that we can deliver. Our main focus is 4K, UHD, HDR, from lenses right the way through to cameras and the displays.
Fantastic, and it's a special anniversary version, tell me.
And so Saturday, US Open Finals, it's like we got to watch Serena, right? And, you know, of course, I'm very proud of our brand.
That's what we want to show
even
here.
if I'm in Italy,
Around us, you can see a vast array of cameras. We have another camera on the other side, an ENG-style camera, XF705, we just launched, and it's moving innovation forward. So we've first put a camera to incorporate H.265
it's a fantastic way to serve a single customer. And that experience would have not been possible without fantastic over-the-top. Now, this is what you think of as traditional distributor getting benefit out of over-the-top technologies and the cloud and all the things that we're talking about. So I think, you know, sometimes we make the world sound a little bit more black and white than it really is. The reality is, especially for a company of the scale that we are, you don't have a single model that you run with. You have to be able to adapt to all these models and to take advantage of the technology when the technology is ready.
When we talk about sort of the new the audiences and the business models and changing, and we've sort of started to talk about that. I mean, your example is a good one. You know, what's happening in terms of how you're thinking about the viewer or the customer differently? I mean, you all are, I think. Yes, we have to be. So what does that entail? And maybe, you know, does it add things? I mean, for example, Enrique, let's just come to you. I'm thinking about how Sky started, you know, Sky Now. They said, well, if somebody's going to cannibalize us, we'll cannibalize ourselves. Of course, now they've done a deal with Netflix as well. But, I mean, is that part of how you're thinking about your viewer, customer differently?
I think we just have a new respect for the end consumer that the industry did not have 10 years ago, okay? I won't say 5, I think by the end things were changing, but 10 years ago, and by the way, I'm throwing myself under the bus here, because I've been in this industry for 32 years. And 10 years ago, we were spending our time trying to figure out how do we capture the consumer in our own experience, and everything else was evil, right? I think today, I mean, one of you was reminding me, we just closed the deal with Sky, right? You know, so we're supposed to be competitors, but we have common interest on advanced advertising. They're a content provider to us. They use our networks to carry their content. So it's a lot harder now to kind of separate this black and white. And I think the reason for that is, as an industry, we take the consumer much more seriously than we used to, okay? And by the way, we did it not for altruistic reasons, but, you know, the consumer ultimately votes with their feet, right? And if I don't serve that consumer where that consumer wants to be served, there's many choices today. right. They can just go to a different distributor, to a different...
So David, when you look at the consumer, obviously Viacom has been, this is my view, has been, let's say, less quick to kind of do D2C stuff. I mean, you've worked with your traditional partners, which is good because they obviously are earning a lot of money. But are you thinking about D2C? Where is it in your roadmap? And how does, I'm going to slip in cyber here, cybersecurity, how does that feed into that? I mean, is that...
Sure. Well, first I will say that I don't believe we've been slow to D2C. I think we've been looking at the environment. So our B2B partners are very important. Whether it's in Europe, Asia, the United States, Latin America, doesn't matter. But also our version of D2C, Noggin is an example. It's an OTT platform. It's been out for a couple of years now. All of our apps, sites and apps, are out there, whether it's Nickelodeon, MTV. We're launching something called MTV Plus in the UK in October. We're looking at opportunities for many about servers. It's in conjunction with the mobile providers. So the goal is to expand our opportunities, whether it's mobile, which is the next frontier, obviously, to get more involved in as they continue to expand, again, back to 5G, 4G, an MVPD in a closed environment, or it is going with the Netflix or Hulu or over the top ourselves. We're balancing that, and what Viacom is strategically doing is trying to make sure short-form content plays a part, long-form content, and advanced advertising and opportunities. Cybersecurity plays a big piece in the fact that we have to not only worry about, obviously, somebody hacking in, but stealing our content, especially around the movie side of it. Watermarking and fingerprinting and making sure that that content stays enriched. And I'll be very clear, working with the MVPDs, making sure that we adhere to what they need for authentication so that if we are working with a company like Sky or anybody else, I don't have to worry about, okay, so they don't want Apple Play to work, or they're not interested in something. Well, we have to abide by those rules because in reality, for their infrastructure, for the content in that infrastructure, we need to make sure that it works to what they're looking for, whereas it may be something different if it's outside their infrastructure.
Michelle? Yeah. But I was just going to say that I feel like, and I think it's generally observed, that the current technology for reaching the consumer with a degree of respect, personalization, customization that's become the norm is very difficult. Just take DRM, digital rights management, full stop. Incredibly complicated and incredibly costly, directly or indirectly, to sustain through the entire supply chain, and it's a direct offshoot of how stuff is built. And the corollary to that is the consumer doesn't have a lot of control, if any, over the transparency of use of their data, and that privacy sort of used to matter. Now it's at a societal tipping point because of the simple fact of the degree of targeting that's kind of come out, and the manipulation of it, of course, with social media, particularly in the United States this past year. So looking at those two things, right? The fact that we've got a very rigid environment, it's very expensive to try to securely get content to people. And the other side, which is users have a hard time, and in some cases have no transparency about the exchange of their attention for their data.
And also what they're looking at.
To really capitalize on the richness of content and the true personalization of it, I think we need new solutions.
We need new solutions. That's you guys' job.
Well, and in fact, that is the motivation. Now, fortunately, there's tremendous capacity to address this at this point in time, and I think we are at the tipping point for that happening, and this great demand to go direct to consumer to have control, and for the content provider to have control, and that is driving it.
So one of our issues was data. I mean, that was one that came up. So I can start with Enrique or someone else. I mean, what are we thinking about data? Enrique, I think about you. You came from TiVo. Personalization was in your DNA. That's what it was all about. And you were early into that at TiVo, right? Really early. I mean, some people, I remember when my first demo of TiVo, I was like, what does it do? You actually you're going to know what I want next? Wow. I mean, that was, So where are we with that now? And how is data becoming more important? And what's the thing that's, I mean, we all know.
Listen, from our perspective, it's about putting the content that the consumer wants closest to that consumer, whatever that is.
Right.
Okay, and it's less about taking advantage of the consumer. How do you minimize the distance between the consumer and the content they want to watch?
But you don't think the data helps, again, inform that decision for the consumer?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it powers it.
But which data? Which data? How do you know what data you're supposed to be? I mean, it's like a fire hose. I mean, you get so much stuff.
Oh, you get a tremendous amount of data today, and it's amazing how well you can predict what the consumer will do next based on that amount of data. And I think the challenge for us and the opportunity is how do you make the proper use of that data within all the privacy rules and regulations, which continue to get more complex every day, rightly so in some cases. You cite some examples that I think, rightly so are driving regulation deeper. But how do you take advantage of that data without it being intrusive to the end consumer? Because it's not about the end consumer telling you what they like. It's about you putting it in front of them, sometimes even before they know they like it.
I still believe in serendipity. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to have a little serendipity built in? I mean, do I just want to see stuff I've already seen or stuff that they think I already have seen? I get a little pissed off, actually, about that.
But I think, again, going back to the perspective and even that opting and opting out, GDPR in the European markets. So, again, sometimes from a consumer perspective, and now I'm talking for myself as the consumer, I'm very hesitant to opt into things because I don't want to share all my data on every different platform. But I know my children love sharing that data because they don't want the inconvenience of using that tablet and then coming home and going out to Netflix on their laptop. They want it to look the same. I don't want you to give me something I'm not interested in. But that's why that whole ecosystem, we talked about ad ID earlier, or that content taxonomy, it's that whole experience. And that data helps inform it. Machine learning and AI will make it that much better, and algorithms that optimize it, whether it's in a walled garden or it's outside. But you have to have data to create those points.
In terms of practical solutions for problems, because Enrique's here, I was on the launch team of TiVo with DirecTV, and this story doesn't get told nearly well enough or often enough, but the personal information segregation in that system was world-class. And it was because there was a conscious decision made as the process was built that TiVo had information on one side of a firewall and the billing system had information on the other side of the firewall. There was a common identifier that we built at the time using the conditional access system that worked at DirecTV, and the twain never met. So these guys could do extraordinary work in recommendation engines and inferential work, but the access to their personal information was completely segregated. And I feel like because people weren't really adequately focused on that, maybe the industry lost sight on that as an important priority. But it wasn't, it wasn't a hard problem to solve if you made it a priority from the beginning. And so I think hopefully we'll see another generation of companies coming up that take these kind of things more seriously and use data in more effective ways. But I think TiVo did a lot of things right. They were just really early.
If you look at today, something like advanced advertising, for example, there is a well-established process by which you can completely remove personally identifiable information and serve an ad that is more likely to be interesting to you as a consumer without you in any sort of way limiting your privacy rights. And I think that is an issue of maturity that the industry can get to, where we can get very comfortable, and I think we can get the consumer comfortable that at the end of the day, there's utility behind that.
And also, it'll be a great thing to do, because then you can say it's not just happening out there in Google and Facebook land.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, the reality is already happening today in the traditional television market. I mean, we are launching advanced advertising. We've been public with some of our plans. You can imagine that we're working on what the next generation of that is. And we know that at the end of the day, it leads to both a better consumer experience and a better business for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, we love that combination.
And more revenue.
Exactly.
Exactly. Let's go to blockchain, because that's a big topic, and obviously we've sort of been talking about it. It's kind of come up a couple times. So Seth, why don't you sort of explain a little bit more? I mean, you've done kind of the distributed networks and how this all works, but if we're looking at this, how is pure blockchain going to help this industry?
Well, blockchain is a technology that decentralizes the aggregation of data and essentially takes the trust out of the equation. And so if you start to think through, without going into a big side chain on this.
Give us an example. If that's the
so
way.
If you think, I'll give you a parallel. So I started in the music business, and when I was in college, for those of you that were in the music business, the record business was run by paper charts. So every week, the general manager of every tower and every other record store would physically report back to Billboard and others how many records they had sold, how many Madonna records they had sold, how many this record, blah, 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 blah. So shockingly, the system was rife with inaccuracy. Let's call it inaccuracy. When SoundScan came along, which was a technology where every CD was physically scanned, or every LP was physically scanned, here's what happened because I was there. Overnight, Madonna went from #1 to number 33. And overnight, I think it was NWA, but it was definitely kind of a hip-hop artist, went to #1 and stayed there for weeks. So once data became accurate and transparent and unalterable or immutable, the record business had to adapt to the fact that they couldn't kind of cook the books anymore. And frankly, a lot of people who aren't bad actors just found out, wow, this is a really amazing thing. So in a short period of time, every major label in the US and Europe had a hip-hop division, and urban music became a much stronger force. So that I think, is an analog to what you'll see when sort of distributed ledger technology becomes more pervasive. You'll see actual data that people have to trust because nobody was in the process jiggering it. It didn't go through a bunch of intermediates or intermediate systems. It was disintermediated and written directly to kind of an inviolate system.
So the token thing is interesting, quite
That's
controversial.
Yeah.
Michelle, maybe you could tell us about, tokens are something that I think Seth's using. You're not a big fan of tokens. So just to talk about tokens and ICO and sort of the cyber crypto world. Because I think for a lot of us in the media business, we're like, this looks really kind of scary. I mean, all these ICOs that are going on, and what does a token mean, and how do I trade it? And
yeah, so it's less that, I'm somehow against tokens or think they're bad. It's that the decentralized architectures have a lot of purposes. And my point is more, it's really directly complementary to what Seth is saying. If you think about this veracity of data and the fact that you can suddenly collect, verify it, and have it transparent, and then you think about the fact that it's coming from the actual media consuming experience, to get the full force effect of that and the full force benefit, you need to have that technology coupled in with the actual consumption of the media. And what I mean by that is the delivery and access control that supports or is intrinsic to consuming that media ought to feed right back into that decentralized ledger. And so, to answer your question, Kate, my feeling is to make this meaningful, and I agree with Seth 100%, that the decentralized ledger approaches are absolutely transformational for the way that media is distributed, consumed, monetized, and really we get at some of these problems we've been talking about. It has to be, that technology has to be intrinsic with the entire distribution experience. And what that means in relation to tokens, it's a little different view about the blockchain. It's an incorporation of decentralized access control with a decentralized distribution capability. And how the media is actually monetized, and tokenization is really a way of, a new way of monetizing the value of the media, I think is orthogonal to that and ought to be an independent choice. For the time being, right, we operate in an economic situation where cryptocurrencies and also token derivatives are not yet stable. They will become so. But the point is we could be taking advantage of decentralized ledger technology without necessarily coupling that to how payment is done.
Okay. So this is a big topic, obviously, but just quickly, David and Enrique, is this something you're even thinking about, or is this way out in terms of your roadmaps?
So we're thinking about it. We're actually working with it now, both within partners, things like OpenAP that we're launching with partners like Fox and Turner and Group, as well as working with other third parties and internally to understand it and figure out where to use it. But I think it has to be native, like we were chatting earlier. As a bolt-on, I just think it's destined for failure. If you don't make it native, I just don't think it's going to.
It's also a technical reality. You cannot store media data or anything large in a blockchain. It simply doesn't work.
Enrique.
For us, it's about how are you going to integrate these new technologies into a large-scale existing business.
Yes.
Just if we had had this panel 5 years ago, cloud would have made the top of the chart, right? And at that time, there would be some people that would say, cloud, we're going to kill the distributors and blah, 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 blah. Right. Listen, I can't get my job done today without the cloud. And so you can call me traditional operator all you want. I have to embrace these technologies, and frankly, these technologies have to embrace us as customers in order for them to really take the relevance that they really deserve. And so I do expect that blockchain and significant improvements on technology are going to become important to us, but they're going to become important as part of a broader ecosystem, as opposed to all or nothing. You said earlier, I'm sorry, you said earlier that Netflix today is looking for distribution. Well, guess what? In order for them to get the scale that they want to get to, they have to get traditional distribution.
That's right. So we have to march on to AI. Sorry. Is that okay? Because I'm
really quickly. One. This is useful. So one of my colleagues is Halsey Miner, who was the founder of CNET and the number 2, the co-founder of Salesforce. And his analogy is, with all this stuff, we are where we were on the internet in 96, 97, and there's a lot of garbage, and there's a lot of bad actors, and there's a lot of sketchy products. But out of that ecosystem came Google, came Amazon, came the Goliaths of today. So you will see, frankly, there are a lot of companies that aren't very good, but this is going to be a transformational technology, and it'll take a few more years for that to play out.
I agree.
AI. I've got one from the Slido as well. So how are you using AI? AI is obviously a big topic. So I guess how are you using it? I mean, anybody can start. Do you want to start? Who wants to start?
I'll be happy to start.
Yep.
I'm using it ad nauseum because it now solves large-scale problems very well and new problems we couldn't solve before. So very briefly, because our content fabric is a large-scale decentralized network distributing content with certain properties like very low latency, we do invented several algorithms for predicting best possible routes and choosing those for clients, right? Another example of that is when getting deep learning, which is video indexing. So you can enrich media as it's ingested in such a platform automatically with tagging that you could then use in these personalized and new flexible, ledger-based commerce models. And so the gamut ranges from what you think of as machine learning to deep learning. The point for software engineers and also media problems is quite practical to solve problems we couldn't before, and the availability of compute at low cost has been transformational to being able to do this fast.
That's what I think it is. I mean, for Enrique, I mean, it's just big.
Oh, everything. I mean, it touches everything. Everything from customer care, the ability to find a problem deep in the network, looking at data on our network in Germany and solving a problem before it gets created in the UK. We could not do that without AI being infused. If I look at search and recommendations, if I look at what ad to show you, I mean, there's just about, basically no aspect of our business that isn't going to get touched or hasn't already been started to get touched by AI.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. The only thing I would add is looking at future technologies, so AR aspects, machine learning, AI, and what it could bring to bear, especially as the pipes get bigger.
Okay, in terms of production stuff, that's a good point. So the last round is just, what do you see going into the future? And I'm pushing the envelope here, but because we don't have a session after this, I'm doing this. So I'm going to take a couple more minutes, so thank you for staying around, people. Future looking. We've looked at sort of the big buckets that we said we were going to look at. As you look forward, what are the things on the horizon that you are, for your roadmap, your next roadmap? So we've talked about what's going on now. Look out for us. What are the things that are on your in-tray or your inbox? Or thinking, I should really get my head around that one.
So from an operations aspect, literally getting our broadcast centers lights out, going back to the cloud perspective, and really being dedicated to making that work and remote enabling our whole organization from production, marketing, the rest.
Right.
But from a future, I think 5G is really going to pave the way to a future opportunity that's going to allow the pipes to get bigger and allow that data to flow more intelligently. So blockchain becoming more mature, or the ability to do AR, as I mentioned, the Daily Show or other things. It becomes an ecosystem for you. Speaking of concierge services, I like to use Iron Man Jarvis. Have that conversation with your concierge service, not Alexa tell me this or Google tell me that. And then really creating that ecosystem of one-to-one, really giving you content the way you want it, different than what I'm seeing.
So what you're saying is Viacom's going to launch a Jarvis concierge service.
I only wish, but possibly, you never know.
I like that. Better than Amazon Alexa, right? Hey,
Absolutely.
come on, it's Jarvis, go on, Iron Man. Okay, Michelle, what's the thing on the horizon?
Well, I'm most interested in the economics of content consumption on the internet. And the reason, even though I'm such a technologist by background, I feel that all of this really comes down to the economic upside and efficiency of how we're able to extract value out of the content given user attention is the crux of value on the internet right now, and I think we're trapped by the current situation, and it's currently very much monopolized by the technological means by which content is distributed.
That's a really interesting point. Okay, Enrique.
I mean, for me, it's all about connecting these different layers.
Yeah.
Again, as a company, we participate as a distributor, we participate as a content aggregator, in some cases as a content owner, as a mobile network provider. So what's most important for us is to make sure that we can operate at these different levels and try to optimize the business based on those levels.
Yeah, but any technology that you're looking at, thinking...
So where I was headed is ultimately, it's all about making these broadband networks perform better and better and better everywhere. 5G, I think, is going to have a clear role, but it's not really limited to 5G. You would be amazed at how much more data we can pump today on a fiber link that was put in the ground 5-10 years ago, and how much more juice we get out of that, and how much more juice we're going to get 5 years from now, because it's a lot harder to dig streets than to write a new piece of code, and so we're very focused on that type of progression.
Seth? Big thing coming at us like a train?
Yeah, I think in 5 or 7 years, we'll look back on this time in media and think that the economics of media now were extraordinarily inefficient. We all know the issues with the bundle. Got a whole new generation around the world coming up with influencer-related content. 3% of people on YouTube get paid above the poverty line. There's no equivalent to somebody's point about Uber. I guess it was Michelle. There's no surge pricing equivalent for most OTT. You pay one fixed amount per month. When you start to think about the ability to create more dynamic pricing, more efficient pricing mechanisms, I think that's going to be an extraordinary new opportunity, and it's going to be powered by intelligent uses of cognitive science and AI, that's what we're focused on, and other systems that sort of unleash a lot of economic value from things that are fairly dormant now.
Cool. This has been fascinating. Sorry we felt a little bit running at the end, but I think we got a lot of good information out there. I really appreciate you guys doing this for us on this last session of IBC 2018. So I wanted to thank you all for sticking around. This is our last session of IBC 2018. Please come back next year. Before we adjourn to the greater exhibition and our lives, let me just have you join me in thanking our panel. We have the Definitive Roadmap panel. That's David Kline, Michelle Munson, Enrique Rodriguez, and Seth Shapiro. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
A bit more future gazing now.